Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of Loomer Unleashed. I'm your host, Laura Loomer. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about how if there's one thing that former Ambassador John Bolton loves more than starting foreign wars, it's Ron DeSantis. Now, you probably noticed this week that Ambassador Bolton decided to publicly attack Donald Trump, saying that by the time that the general election rolls around, he's going to be a convicted felon. Now, this isn't the first time that John Bolton has publicly sparred with President Donald Trump, and it's not the first time that he has tried to undermine Donald Trump's chances at re-election and has attacked his 2024 presidential bid. Earlier this year, as I have reported, if you've been following my Substack, John Bolton actually said that he thinks that Ron DeSantis would make a good president. And on top of that, he attacked Donald Trump as a loser. Along with publicly citing in support of Governor Ron DeSantis' 2024 presidential campaign prior to him actually announcing his official run for president, John Bolton publicly said on live national television that Donald Trump's campaign is poison to the GOP. Now, if you're just an everyday average American voter tuning into the news and you were to see John Bolton's comments attacking Donald Trump's campaign as poison to the GOP, you would probably not really know what the history of it was, and you'd think that John Bolton was just another member of the Republican Party and the GOP establishment that was speaking out negatively about Donald Trump. But it is true that President Donald Trump hired Bolton during his first term as president to serve as his national security advisor. And then in 2019, President Trump fired Bolton after the two had disputes over foreign policy decisions regarding Iran, North Korea, and Afghanistan. On September 10th, 2019, President Donald Trump fired John Bolton publicly on Twitter in a tweet when he tweeted the following, quote, "I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration, and therefore I asked John for his resignation, which was given to me this morning. I thank John very much for his service. I will be naming a new national security advisor next week." Now, as you can imagine, Ambassador Bolton didn't take too kindly to President Donald Trump publicly firing him over Twitter. In fact, Bolton profusely denied the way that Donald Trump described the terms of his firing and insisted that he himself had turned in his resignation to President Trump days prior. And now in the year 2023, just 4 years after President Trump fired John Bolton, you can see that John Bolton is working overtime to undermine Donald Trump and make the case for why he shouldn't be the GOP nominee as we head into the 2024 presidential election. In fact, this week on August 10th, John Bolton took to Twitter to say, "Most Americans from any party don't want to vote for a convicted felon, and that fact apparently won't be well known before the GOP primaries. If you can defeat the legal system simply by saying, 'Well, I'm a candidate for president,' then you've created presidential immunity." Essentially what John Bolton is saying is that the GOP primary hasn't taken place, and we're still pretty far out from the 2024 general election. And while President Donald Trump currently isn't a convicted felon, John Bolton is predicting that by the time the general election comes around in November 2024, Donald Trump will be a convicted felon. However, there's just one big problem with John Bolton's logic, and that's the fact that every single time that Donald Trump faces a new indictment at the hands of our crooked DOJ, the Department of Injustice, as I like to call them, he continues to skyrocket by 10 points or more in national polls. You see, political strategists, GOP consultants, and rhino presidential candidates like Chris Christie, Mike Pence, and Governor Ron DeSantis severely underestimated Donald Trump. They also underestimated the loyalty of the MAGA America First Base and how much loyalty matters to the average GOP voter. You can just imagine it now, all of these rhinos sitting in some smoke-filled room in Washington, D.C., plotting how they're going to work with the Biden regime and the DOJ to roll out indictments and arrests against President Donald Trump every single time there's a major GOP date or a major caucus or a major vote in a key primary state, laughing their asses off thinking, "Ha ha 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 ha, we've got him this time." But that's the exact same flawed logic that the GOP used in 2015 and 2016 when they attacked Donald Trump as an outsider and said that he had no chance of, one, winning a primary, or two, ever going on to beat Hillary Clinton and becoming president of the United States. But Donald Trump beat a crowded GOP primary field in 2016. And to everybody's surprise, except for mine, because I've always been a Trumper since day one, He ended up beating and absolutely obliterating Hillary Clinton on Election Day in 2016, going on to be the greatest president our country has ever had. And so it's easy to say, yeah, rhinos are obviously going to support Ron DeSantis. They're going to support anybody who is anti-Trump, because whether it's the GOP establishment, the Democrat Party, the DOJ, as I like to call it, the Uniparty, which it's one big club and we're not a part of it in case you haven't noticed, their number one goal is to get Donald Trump. And so we have to resist. But what makes John Bolton a particular sinister figure in all of this is his connection to Governor Ron DeSantis and his nearly decade-long relationship with the governor through their mutual combined interests. And that's, of course, starting foreign wars at the taxpayers' expense. And so I think it's important for GOP voters to understand the relationship, not just professionally, but also financially, between former Ambassador John Bolton and Governor Ron DeSantis, to further prove to you how Governor Ron DeSantis is a Manchurian candidate who's been groomed by the deep state, the military-industrial complex, and the Uniparty for a time such as this to try to take out President Donald Trump. Now, as I have previously reported in my Substack, in the days following the 2022 November election, in which Governor Ron DeSantis was able to secure re-election for a second term as governor of Florida, John Bolton said, quote, "DeSantis had a very successful run as governor. He won re-election on November 8th with a big majority. A lot of people look at him as the next generation candidate. That's one of Trump's biggest problems. His act is old and tired now." Well, if President Trump's act was old and tired, we would see it being reflected in the polls. However, as every single day passes and as more voters continue to meet Ron DeSantis on the campaign trail, Donald Trump continues to skyrocket, and Ron DeSantis is now nearly 50 points behind Donald Trump in national GOP primary polls. It's important to remember what John Bolton is notorious for, and that's, of course, his penchant for foreign wars and getting the United States embroiled in foreign conflicts. On July 12, 2022, during an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper, Bolton actually admitted on live television that he has helped orchestrate coups in foreign countries. He continued to berate President Trump on CNN, adding that Trump is not competent enough to, quote, "orchestrate and pull off a carefully planned coup," end quote.
I don't know that I agree with you, to be fair, with all due respect. One doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but, other places, it takes a lot of work, and that's not what he did.
Wait a second. Isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't we want a president and a leader who isn't going to be meddling in foreign affairs, who isn't going to be dragging us into useless foreign wars that aren't putting the American people and the interests of our country first? You see, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, a Democrat, or independent. Most Americans are anti-war, but people like Ron DeSantis and John Bolton would like you to think otherwise. And of course, it's very crucial and pivotal to how they met and how their nearly decade-long relationship was formed. You see, the fact that John Bolton is criticizing Donald Trump for not being what he calls competent enough to start a coup, it sheds a light onto the type of candidate that he's looking for. In other words, Bolton thinks that Ron DeSantis is much more fit for violating international law than President Donald Trump, who's been very vocal about being anti-war and has publicly condemned the Iraq War. In fact, in 2008, prior to even launching a presidential bid, Donald Trump condemned George W. Bush on national television and even called for him to be impeached over his lie that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. In fact, President Donald Trump didn't just stop there. During a debate in 2016 between himself, Jeb Bush, and other participants in the crowded GOP primary of 2016, Donald Trump confronted Jeb Bush on live television about his brother's involvement in the Iraq War, calling it a disaster. As both a private citizen, a successful businessman, and then as the President of the United States, Donald Trump's foreign policy position has always remained the same. He's always been anti-war and has always warned against the United States getting involved in useless foreign conflicts. And so it makes sense as to why professional warmonger John Bolton is deciding to choose Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. In comparison to Donald Trump, who has always opposed the Iraq War, Ron DeSantis is on the record publicly supporting the Iraq War. In fact, Ron DeSantis doesn't often talk about his military service, you may have noticed, and there's a very specific reason why. In fact, many people are completely unaware of Ron DeSantis' military background, and there's a very specific reason why he doesn't want you knowing anything about it. You see, prior to running for United States Congress and becoming governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis served as a lieutenant commander and JAG lawyer in the United States Navy during the administration of George W. Bush, in which he was tasked with the job of overseeing the torture of prisoners at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba and Fallujah during the Iraq War. In fact, you may have recently seen reports in the news about how Showtime canceled a Vice documentary that was supposed to come out this year detailing Ron DeSantis' time overseeing torture at the infamous Gitmo facility. Now, this documentary was supposed to feature firsthand testimony and an interview with Mansour Gaddafi, formerly referred to as detainee number 441 at Guantanamo Bay. He publicly came forward following his release to say that it was Ron DeSantis who allowed for, observed, and actually participated in illegal acts of human torture between March 2006 and January 2007. According to reports, in one particular graphic instance, Gaddafi described how DeSantis watched with amusement during an inmate hunger strike as he and other detainees were force-fed the meal replacement Shake Ensure through a nasal feeding tube that was forcefully pushed down their throats. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, Laura, how does this relate to Ambassador John Bolton? Well, John Bolton's hatred for President Donald Trump has been very well publicly documented, but what hasn't been publicly documented to such great of an extent is his relationship with Governor Ron DeSantis. According to FEC reports, Ron DeSantis has actually been pocketing campaign cash from John Bolton's PAC as far back as his first congressional run 10 years ago. Along with accepting financial contributions from Ambassador Bolton, Ron DeSantis is also on video expressing his love for Bolton, stating that he views their leadership styles as being similar and that Bolton is someone he admires and aspires to be like.
I think if you look at the different strands of our movement, you have a national security branch, which I think is best represented by Reagan's philosophy of peace through strength. So you look at someone like an Ambassador Bolton who's supporting me.
Along with overseeing acts of torture at Guantanamo Bay, like John Bolton, Ron DeSantis has publicly broken with Donald Trump on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, arguing that America isn't doing enough to support Ukraine. And just this week, in a podcast interview that was published by the Wall Street Journal, John Bolton expressed the same sentiment, encouraging the United States to get more involved in the military conflict between Ukraine and Russia, as well as China and Taiwan. Now, in response to John Bolton's attacks on President Trump's 2024 presidential campaign, President Trump took to Truth Social to respond, posting, quote, "I found John Bolton to be one of the dumbest people in government, but I'm proud to say I used him well. A total and unhinged warmonger, the red-faced boiler ready to explode, was one of those very stupid voices that got us into the Middle East quicksand. $7 trillion and millions of deaths later, nothing. The good news is that I won big negotiations with this moron by my side. When I brought him into a room with hostile foreign leaders, they thought I was going to war and conceded all." Now, at the end of the day, whether it's Governor Ron DeSantis, who is running a failing presidential campaign, or former Ambassador John Bolton, who is publicly humiliated by Donald Trump when he was fired in a tweet, they're just mad that President Trump is better at playing the game than they are. In summary, Ron DeSantis is a puppet of the military-industrial complex who neocon warmongers like former Ambassador John Bolton view as a vehicle to take down President Trump in an anti-MAGA, anti-America first, pro-establishment coup d'etat so they can restore their status quo of death and destruction overseas. I'm Laura Loomer, and if you enjoyed this content, please be sure you subscribe to my Substack, lauraloomer.substack.com. It's free to subscribe, but if you want to support my independent journalism, you can subscribe for $7 a month or $70 a year. Also, please be sure that you're following me on Twitter, Gab, Getter, and Truth Social at Laura Loomer. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this episode of Loomer Unleashed, Goldco. Banks are getting bailed out, and who's going to pay for it? You are. They say that taxpayers won't pay, and they say that other banks will pay. But how are those banks going to get the money? They'll probably raise your bank fees like they always do. And if the Fed step in, you'll likely also be paying an inflation tax. In times like this, storing all your money in a bank may be very risky, as we have seen. So what can two average Joes like you and I even do about it? You can protect your wealth with gold and silver, just like so many other Americans and even banks are doing right now. Call 855-317-5157 or visit goldco.com/Laura Loomer to learn how to protect your savings with gold and silver. Take action today to protect yourself and your family from financial collapse. Again, call 855-317-5157 or Visit goldco.com/Laura Loomer and learn how you could get up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. That's 855-317-5157 or goldco.com/Laura Loomer. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Loomer Unleashed.